Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode here on RNFM Radio. Today, we're actually hanging out on Google Hangouts on air with, of course, my co-host Keith Carlson and a wonderful guest that we have today, and I can't wait to dive into that. This is episode 113, and we are glad to have you tuning in with us for the latest news, trends, and hot topics with the leaders and thought provokers in our industry. I am Kevin Ross, chillaxing here on Google Hangouts, and of course this podcast with you, Keith Carlson. He's also here with me as well. Keith, how are you today, sir?
Hey, Kev, I'm doing great. Hello to everyone. Welcome to a live edition of RNFM Radio. Like Kevin said, it's episode number 113, and we are very excited to be back again for a live show. And Kevin, it's nice to see you as always. Maybe someday we'll broadcast from the same room. We have to do that sometime, so I'll have to come up to Boulder to do that. But anyway, welcome everyone, whether you're listening live or to the archive. And Kev, if you want to let people know all the details, I'll be back to introduce our guest in a couple minutes.
Well, so radio platform, that's where we're hanging out, that's where we exist, and that's where you can tune in to every episode there, both video and, of course, audio. So head on over to rnfmradio.com, and guess what? You're going to find out a lot more about Keith, myself, and our guests. You'll also find all of our social media buttons down there at the bottom. We're hanging out here on Google+, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, you name it, that's where we are, because we are where you want to be. And, of course, hang out on that hashtag RNFM Radio, because if you do, we will find you, share, like, post, and of course engage with you online, because that's what we love to do. We love to connect with the community at large. Of course, we are on iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher Radio, and of course we are partners over there at the ProMed Network at promednetwork.com/RNFM Radio. And again, hit us up at hashtag RNFM Radio and we'll find you and get back to you. Of course, you can leave us a voicemail or text message at 720-466-3022. And of course, we'll give you a roundup of the upcoming guests and all the housekeeping issues as we need to later on in the show. So I'm going to go ahead and hand the mic back to Keith, and we are going to start the show.
Thank you, Kevin, and it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Cynthia Phelps. She's the founder of InnerAlly, a startup company looking to revolutionize how we care for our own mental wellness. Using positive psychology principles, she's developing mobile, daily practice apps. And Dr. Phelps has a background in pharmacology and neuroscience, and she has over 15 years of experience in designing technologies for learning and behavior change. You can find InnerAlly at InnerAlly, that's ALLY.com. They're also on Facebook and Twitter. So, Cynthia Phelps, welcome to RNFM Radio.
Well, thank you, Keith. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you. We're really excited. And Kevin, of course, loves mobile apps, so I'm sure we're going to wax poetic about that any moment. But I just wanted to ask you, do you want to tell us a little bit about InnerAlly and the company and the mission and what you all are up to?
Sure, I'd love to. InnerAlly is essentially based on positive psychology research. In particular, we love the research of Dr. Kristen Neff, who has been studying a concept called self-compassion for about 10 years. And so really to kind of explain everything that I might want to explain today, I'll start with the explanation of what is self-compassion. And so self-compassion, it has three parts actually. One is kindness to yourself, which is showing compassion to yourself. The other is common humanity, which means that you realize that you're not the only one in the whole world having the same kind of problems. It's basically, everybody has similar problems. You're not isolated from everybody else, and we need everybody to be able to understand that they're not isolated and that everyone has problems. Everyone suffers. And then the third piece is about mindfulness. And so mindfulness is important because if you don't realize you have a relationship with yourself, then you're kind of out of luck practicing any self-compassion. So mindfulness, knowing that you have a relationship with yourself, common humanity, knowing that you're part of a network of other people who also struggle and have problems, and then also the ability to show kindness or love to yourself, make up kind of the three backbones of self-compassion. And I remember when I first ran across this research literature, I was reading it, and I had one of those existential moments where I realized, wow, this stuff is really important, and I don't have any of it. I don't think I really even was registering on the scale of self-compassion. And so I realized that I was probably missing something that was going to really be a key part of having a happy life. And indeed, self-compassion is associated with all kinds of positive outcomes. People who have a high level of self-compassion, they have low levels of anxiety and stress, and they have low levels of depression. Not only that, there's lots of positive things about it. They tend to be more productive people, more creative or innovative, and they're better at interpersonal relationships, which is hardly a shock. If you have a better relationship with yourself, you actually can have better relationships with other folks. And really, one of the big kickers is that people that have high levels of self-compassion are more resilient in the face of change or trauma. And so I wanted what this research said that I could have, but then when I looked at what it meant to be self-compassion, I realized that I didn't have any of it at all.
Okay, so you realized that there was a place here for your own learning, right?
Oh, yes,
and
yes.
you had to really do the work yourself in order to actually talk about this to other people. And it's interesting, you're talking about the mental wellness, mental health, and self-compassion. And but like, because I've told you that most of our listeners are nurses and other healthcare professionals and some other folks who aren't in healthcare. So how does this relate to people who engage in what is lately called emotional labor, where you're actually working for the benefit of another person and maybe having to mask your own emotions in the moment because you need to be present for the person that you're serving?
Right. I think that's going to be really important. Anybody who's playing that kind of caretaker role, if it's a professional nurse level, all the way to maybe taking care of an elderly parent or even a child, really, there's times when it's inappropriate not to emote what you're feeling inside because you need to take care of somebody else. And I don't know a lot about that body of research about the caretakers, but I do know that they are at risk for a lot of things like anxiety and depression and some of these things. And so I think that self-compassion can be a wonderful way to essentially practice mental wellness. And so let me say a little bit about that, because my thinking on what we're doing with these apps has kind of progressed over the period of time that I've been working on it. I have a company called Healthy Designs, and it's a contracting company, and I contract with the Veterans Administration. In there, we develop apps with their health professionals, and so those apps are things like panic disorder app, which helps veterans manage that kind of mental illness. Schizophrenia app, which will help them do medication management and coping. And so these are very, they follow like the traditional Western disease-based model of medicine, where something's wrong with you and we're going to fix it. Whereas, we know that this idea of kind of holistic health and wellness is something that's come into the popular society now and is creeping into medicine. I'd like to shove it a little faster, but So wellness is the idea that you don't have to wait to get sick to actually take proactive steps to make your life better. And so I kind of see I'm picturing InnerAlly as a wellness product. So you don't have to have a mental illness to use the things that we're creating necessarily, that you can improve your mental wellness at any stage.
That's
So
great.
yeah, and I know I'm even thinking, and we're going to have to do some research to find out if this is really the case, but I suspect that for some of these mental illnesses, like mild depression or mild anxiety, we may even be able to do some prevention in this
Right.
area. So,
That
but
sounds, yeah.
that remains to be seen, right?
Right, and that sounds like a great idea, the prevention, because that's what healthcare is supposed to be all about these days with the Affordable Care Act, really pushing prevention, and a lot of us out there in the world talking about prevention, because we want to keep people out of the hospital, we want to keep people healthy, and we don't want them to experience these symptoms of burnout and acute severe stress if we can prevent it. You know, of course, you were saying how it's not just for people with mental illness, that self-compassion and these sorts of apps and techniques are for everybody. And some of us might argue that living in 21st century post-industrial information age society, it's not a form of mental illness, but it's a form of severe mental stress. That,
Yeah.
say you take a 21st century nurse who, say, works in an ICU, and he or she takes care of lots and lots of patients and is doing the emotional labor, you know, that need to put her own feelings aside in the interest of caring for her patients. And then she goes home and cares for her elderly parents, and she cares for her school-age children, and she's paying the bills for her older child to go to college, etc. So it's a very complicated world. So can you explain a little bit how a mobile app would work for self-compassion? Because some of our listeners, myself included, might not understand exactly how a mobile app would figure into the calculus of taking care of oneself.
That's right. I'm glad you asked that question, because I think mobile part of what we're doing is really a key component. It wasn't that long ago that none of us had this thing in our pocket, and now
Mhm.
virtually all of us have this in our pocket, or it's really only like an arm's length away, almost 24 hours a day. And so, we have fundamentally changed as a society how we utilize technology since, let's see, I guess it started around 2007 when I think the first iPhone came out. Uh, uh, there were other smartphones and PDAs and things before that, but the cultural shift happened right around then. And so, one of the things, so you just described to me that nurses are facing a chronic problem of chronic emotional, physical fatigue that they can accumulate and that they experience on a regular basis. And so, I wouldn't prescribe for you just a 2-week vacation as a way to fix that. And so I would say that you want to have something that's with you all the time. And so having a mobile device be part of that intervention for you to help yourself, I think, is really critical. And so let me just kind of walk you through a scenario, maybe how you would use the InnerAlly, the
Sure.
self-compassion app. So the way that we're designing it, there is essentially a check-in. So, every day, and you can set the time, you get a little notification, ding, and you look at your phone and just tap it, and it would pull up a screen that says, how are you doing? And so you have a few slider bars, so you can check in emotionally, check in, what is your level of self-compassion? Are you doing good on that right now? Or, what is, your level of depression or anxiety, and that kind of thing. And after that, if there's a case where you're in a scenario where, say, you have the depression scale tapped out, or the anxiety scale, or something where it shows that you're kind of in a crisis mode, you're indicating to the app, like, this is really bad right now, we would triage you into essentially an intervention that would help you with that particular thing. And so that might be something like if you were saying that you were really anxious, one of the tools that we have in the app is a variety of guided meditations for breathing. And so and we might even include some video on how to do diaphragm breathing as well. And so we would take you to something that if you're really anxious, here's something that we can take your heart rate down right now. Let's take care of that first, and then we can learn about self-compassion after that. But if you don't check in a kind of acute stress state or something along those lines, you would then get congratulations for checking in. So this app has some game components to you for rewards, and so there is kind of a point system where you can track yourself and how well you're doing.
So I would get a gold star?
You could get a gold star. How we're conceptualizing it right now is the growth of a plant, and so you would get a little leaf.
Okay.
I like the growth model.
Right, and then when the plant is fully grown, you get a Starbucks gift card, right?
Yeah. Well, so here, in fact, it's only a little funny because one of the business models that we're looking at for these apps is a wellness program in a corporation, in which case it would integrate with their existing systems for incentives, which might be maybe not a Starbucks card for anxiety, but
right, no caffeine.
Maybe real money off of your deductibles or long. Depending on where you work, some companies have extremely well-funded wellness programs because they're recognizing the possibilities of how this is impacting their employees. And I know I'm on a slight tangent here, but let me just explain a little bit more about that. We know now that physical wellness programs make dollars and cents. They're saving companies money with preventative health. But if an employee has a mental illness, it actually costs 4 times the amount of a physical illness because of the disability, the lost productivity, and the time away from work, essentially, the lost days. And so it is very expensive if you have employees that are getting progressively worse mentally and you don't catch it early. There's nothing in place right now. The way that we deal with mental health right now in our society is we wait until you break. And then we go, oh, look, that person just broke. We better pick them up off the floor and give them intervention. So, InnerAlly, I conceive of this as a way to prevent some of that stuff from getting to a further stage. We don't have the research on that yet, but we certainly are going to be partnering with both Crescent at UT Austin. We also have a partner, John Roach, here in San Antonio, who is the chair of the behavioral psychiatry department at UT San Antonio, and he is his main area of research is behavior change in the addiction field.
I see. Great. Okay. Well, thank you for that explanation, Cynthia. And, I'm just thinking about that nurse we mentioned before because, sometimes a case study is really helpful. So say you have this nurse in the ICU, she's really stressed, and say that her facility where she works has implemented the use of the InnerAlly self-compassion app. So she has a smartphone on her, whether it's her personal one or one issued by the facility for her to use in the course of her clinical work, and she's having a particularly difficult day. She gets a reminder, or she logs in on InnerAlly. She takes a break and tells her colleague, look, I have to take a 5-minute break. I'm going to do some breathing and kind of pull myself together. She goes to the break room or whatever, goes outside, does one of these exercises, and then that logs into the system of the facility, and her nurse manager will eventually see that, oh, this nurse took a break because she needed to, and we're going to take, $1 off her deductible for this month or something like that. So, or we're going to use that towards credit, a gold star towards something she'll get, like maybe a discount on a gym membership, or maybe she could, or she can work towards getting a massage that the hospital pays for, because she gets 100 points on her InnerAlly app or something like that. So I'm seeing this as a way for us to use it individually, but also how to bring it in systemically.
Yeah.
And a lot of those nurse managers out there, sure, they want their nurses to take care of themselves, but it seems like an app might really make it more feasible to monitor those nurses and then reward them for the positive behavior, right?
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point. The way that we're conceiving InnerAlly right now is that the employer will have a dashboard into the system, so they will be able to kind of see into the system, but we're not giving them individuals' data, like specific data, so they're getting aggregate data. So you could be you could be accruing points because you're interacting with the app, which means you're doing kind of preventative maintenance, positive things for yourself. But you could be very different. Like you could be on the mental illness scale, like really not doing super well, or you could be doing really well. And so the point is we're protecting the employees from, say an employer who might want to use the system to, get rid of somebody who
Right.
was having mental problems. So that we want to have, one thing for sure is it's opt-in. So no employee, we will not work with an employer who is going to make this mandatory. We'll only work with employers that it makes an opt-in program. And then we also are really going to only be giving them aggregate data, so they're not going to see inside an individual's record in the way that you just described. But
good.
we could give them, an individual's points, but that really only tells them how much they've been interacting with the app, because we're really conscious about, mental health. I'm very honest and open about my, mental health status and whatnot, my mental diseases and disorders. But I work for myself, and I don't care about stigma. But the rest of the society hasn't quite caught up to us, and so we need to make sure we protect people. So I think that's an important point.
Wow, thank you.
Another important point, and there's two other ways, so aggregate data for the employer, having a way for them to integrate it with their incentive program, digitally, and maybe even support some of their other incentive programs with that same technology infrastructure. And then the last thing is that they can also use it to help foster communication groups. So, just like you might find a self-help group if you're looking to change some kind of behavior, and it could be like a depression self-help group where you have to go and find it in the community or whatnot. The employer could be in charge of putting together different types of groups within this application so that you can have different types of communication between groups. And what's really interesting about this is to have kind of groups around topics of wellness transcends any hierarchy that there might be in an employer, like a large employer, which creates some really great ways for companies to improve how the communication is going within their corporation. And so I think we're going to see some really interesting, initiatives for how people communicate within their organizations to really, for the greater good. And we just so happen to be, doing positive psychology.
Right. Well, that's great. I'm glad you cleared up the initial Big Brother scenario that I inadvertently spoke of, because actually I'm not embarrassed I mentioned it, actually, because some people might have been thinking that. So maybe I was speaking for some listeners or viewers out there who were thinking, oh, I don't want my boss to know every time I take a break or every time I do some diaphragmatic breathing. So that's nice to know. So it's really just that they get aggregate data showing that you're interacting with the app. So what I'm seeing is that you're making it clear that healthcare professionals are definitely good targets for the app, and also just for self-compassion practices in general. because if we're doing what I mentioned before, what is called now emotional labor, we really have to make sure that we're caring for ourselves, and we talk about that a lot on this show. And I'm curious, you mentioned, I'm looking at your website, and you mentioned, let me see, Kristen Neff, who's the researcher into self-compassion, who seems to be sort of, her work feels like it's maybe the heart or the kernel around which you've developed these apps. And I know you have other people on your team. So do you want to mention some of the other folks or some of the other underpinnings of InnerAlly and what strengths are brought to the company and how you're leveraging those strengths to develop these really amazing applications?
Yeah, sure. Well, Kristen Neff is really the core of the research that her research is what we're built upon, and she literally wrote the book on self-compassion. You can buy it.
Okay.
And she, I would say, is the leading researcher in that area. It has the longest history in that area, and so she's fairly sought after speaker and trainer and teacher right now. And she still holds a full-time faculty position at UT. And so we're very fortunate to have her on our team. And my direct business partner is Tex Morgan, and he is MBA and also a programmer. So he brings both sides of his brain to the equation to help the company work. Then we also have Vijay Thakar, who is our CTO, and he brings a wealth of experience. He was one of the he was the CTO of the company that created Words with Friends. It used to be called New Toy, and so that might be a game that some of your nurses might play in their free time. It's kind of a mobile Scrabble type game that was very popular, and so that company went viral. That game went viral, and they were bought out by a very large gaming company called Zynga. And so he has a great experience that he brings to the team, from being a serial entrepreneur all the way to essentially, the pinnacle of success. And he came to us in the most wonderful way. He found Kristen Neff's researcher, and he wrote her an email and said, "I love what you're doing. How can I help?" And Kristen, who is not a technology person, who doesn't have a Facebook page, and somebody runs her website, and she forwarded this email, like, "I don't know what this guy does, but let's see if you can use him at all for something." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'll just check it out." And so when I got his LinkedIn profile, I was like, "Oh my gosh, jackpot!"
That's great.
So that was really exciting for us. And then a couple other folks that we have on my team. My artist, Greg Davis, is an amazing creative person. He's been in the games industry for years as a creative director, which is the highest level that you can get on the creative side in the games industry. And I worked with him. We both worked at a startup together where we were designing educational games for the iPhone. And so we have a great work experience. And then also my sister is Tracy Phelps, who is a serial participant in startup companies as sales and marketing. And so she has, I think, almost 15 years of experience. She started right out of college with a startup company doing sales and marketing, and she's basically kind of been at every level. And she's now at Jackson, a subsidiary of Jackson Healthcare, doing a startup there. And also helps us. So we've got a fantastic little team for being a bootstrapped startup company.
What a startup! And I see that there's a LinkedIn link for each member of the team. So I'll be connecting with all of them on LinkedIn over the days to come. So that's a very powerful team. And I'm wondering, you're not a nurse, but you've developing these apps that are really going to be useful to nurses and healthcare providers and patients too. Don't want to leave out the patients. So tell me a little bit about your interest in this whole issue of self-compassion and wellness and self-care, where does it come from? Where does it stem from? And how does it speak to you as a person?
Yeah, so it's really part of my personal story, and so I have my background, like you said, is in pharmacology and in neuroscience research, and so around 1996, I made a shift in my career. I had this revelation that technology was really going to be the way that people learned in the future, and I was really excited about it, and I shifted my career towards learning and technology. And I spent about 10 years as faculty at the University of Texas in a school called the School of Health Information Science. I believe they've renamed it to like the School of Bioinformatics or something like that now. But I was brought in to develop a program in learning and technology for basically health science professionals. And so my students were nurses and doctors and all kinds of people in all kinds of health professionals. And essentially most of them were coming back, they wanted to retrain, they wanted to add technology to their skill set in some way. And a lot of them were doing education or behavior change type work. And so that's one of my main interaction with health professionals was through the Health Science Center in that way. And so I got to learn a lot about their world, even though I'm not a practicing health professional at all. I got to learn a lot about, because when you design technologies with folks, you really get down in nitty-gritty and how the healthcare system works and what they wanted to do, to affect change using technology. So that's kind of how I have interacted with health professionals. But for me, my personal story involved a very difficult divorce where I went through a pretty profound period of loss and crisis. And a few years later, I was not okay yet. And I was using alcohol to cope, and I had developed an addiction. And so in 2008, I went through rehab. But I was not at all pleased about quitting drinking. Because it used to be like a very positive part of my life, before I started struggling personally. And so I went through rehab and I had a period of sobriety, but like I was one of those people who are like, I don't want to be a person with a mental illness. I want to be a person who's healthy. And so my struggle was to try to be a normal person, and I wasn't a normal person. I was an addict. I was an alcoholic. And so even though I strived to drink in a moderate way and was pretty successful a lot of the time, I was really depressed and struggling and just suffering. And when I read Kristin Neff's research for the first time, that's when I realized that my pretending to be somebody who was not an alcoholic was not a self-compassionate act. Mm. And that was really a turning point for me where I was like, oh, like I am not being nice to myself. Pretending to be something that I'm not. I'm really hurting myself and I'm suffering a lot for it. Even though nobody else, maybe from the outside, could even see that any of this was going on. And so that's when I realized what I was missing. And it was kind of funny, being the academic that I was, as soon as I found her research, I realized, this is the solution to my problem. And so I was like, I'm going to read about it. Read, Mm-hmm. And I make the analogy, I was kind of like the student who puts the book underneath their pillow and expects to pass the test. I was like the person who studied self-compassion expecting it to change my life. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't practicing it.
Right, you have to apply it and not just understand it theoretically. Yeah, exactly.
And that's what InnerAlly is all about. So a mobile app is a way to allow people to practice self-compassion on a daily basis and make it easy. So after they do their daily check-in, we have what's called a daily practice, which is really just a simple little learning moment with a simple little practice moment attached to it. It may only take you, 1 to 3 minutes to complete that daily practice part, but it gets it in your mind, and it gets it part of a practice for you to be able to change your life with these kinds of things.
And we all know that habits are very powerful, and if we develop positive habits, those can also have a powerful effect. And, I just want to backtrack for a second. First, I want to thank you for being so honest and authentic and sharing your personal journey with us. That really means a lot. I think a lot of our listeners out there can relate to personal stories. So you sharing that you went through a difficult divorce and had an issue with drinking and had to go through rehab, I think that's very courageous of you to share that publicly. And I think it's modeling for our listeners and our community and me that we can really be out there. We can really be authentic and honest about our journeys. And we never know who we're going to affect by talking openly about what we've been through personally. So thank you for that. Just wanted to acknowledge that. Second, I also want to acknowledge that Kevin is having some technical issues in the background. We're being recorded and we're broadcasting live right now, but he's not actually able to join in the conversation. So my sincere apologies to you, Cynthia, and also to all the listeners and viewers out there who love to see and hear Kevin during the show. So thank you for indulging us and just having little old me here with Cynthia. And we definitely miss Kevin's voice. But Kevin did send me a comment in our little G-chat here, and he was mentioning about the stigma of mental illness versus diagnoses of mental illness. And he was saying how, people don't necessarily readily pursue treatment of mental illness like they would, or of stress, for instance, and they're more vigilant, and often healthcare providers are more vigilant about things like diabetes, hypertension, etc. So do you feel that the development and use of these types of apps and this consciousness around self-compassion could actually change, one, the stigma, and two, people's readiness to actually say, yeah, I've got something going on and I need to do something about it?
That is if I could just do that as part of the rest of my life, I would be brilliantly happy, because we're in the midst right now of a radical shift towards understanding, mental illness, and really getting away from shaming people in all ways. It used to be you couldn't shame somebody for their ethnicity or for their gender or for their sexual orientation. Well, we're progressing. We're getting to the point where we don't need to be shaming people for their mental way they present. Everybody has things that they're good at, and everybody has things that they are not as good at. And so seeing kind of mental wellness on a continuum, I think, is really important, because everybody has strengths and everybody has a place in society. And so we're going towards that. We're clearly not there yet, because people still worry about getting fired from their jobs if they talk about mental illness. We're still at a point where some of the faith-based ministries are happy to show up your doorstep if you break your leg with a casserole and help from the community. But if you show up with bipolar disorder, it's a little dodgy still. And so it's getting better. And I think what's interesting is there's a huge revolution going on in the addiction recovery folks. And so I don't know if you've heard, there's a new movie called The Anonymous People.
Not yet, no.
Okay, well, it's a movie about how addiction recovery should not be anonymous, and how people need to start speaking out. And I think, over the course of my lifetime, my parents' generation they did not, like, going to the psychiatrist was a hush-hush super thing, right? And so since then, we had kind of the 90s where it was like, oh, I have a therapist, it became something that was more in vogue. And so we're definitely moving towards, being able to accept people and for their differences and in mental illness, being able to be like, okay, yes, this person may have a mental illness, but that person is not a mental illness.
True, right.
There's a big difference.
They're not their diagnosis, for instance.
Yes, and we've already seen some language change around that. You're, by not calling somebody retarded, there's other ways. It's like, yes, you're a human and you have certain abilities, and you maybe lack some others, right? And so it's this really interesting way that we're slowly changing our language to come up to speed with some of the higher ideals of how we treat others. And obviously, like, that's really, yay, I would love to see everybody actualized. But
well, that's great.
There's a lot of work to be done.
There's a lot of work to be done, yeah. And Kevin chimed in here because he can't talk to us right now. He was wondering about children and young people. So is there a way to utilize these apps, not with like little kids, and maybe there are apps you could develop for, school-age children, around self-esteem and things like that. But say preteens and teens, for instance, how could this be used? I can imagine how it could be used with, say, a 12 or 13-year-old who is, their parents really maybe introduce this app to them, or an app that's related, for them to work on, how to be compassionate with themselves, because we know how much we can beat ourselves up internally when we're preteens and teens. It's a tough time.
It sure is a tough time. And, I think that you hit on a larger problem, which is oftentimes there's these huge life skills, these huge sets of life skills that we're not getting at home, we're not getting at school, we're not getting in faith-based systems. And there are things like how you have a relationship with yourself. Like, I didn't know I had a relationship with myself until I was really pretty old. And so I think that the advent of kind of positive psychology is something that's really will be fascinating to teach young people. In fact, I give talks around San Antonio, and I got a chance to speak to a group of kids that were essentially, they were stuck there on a Saturday morning because it was like that or jail, right? And, and I know they don't want to be there. They're forced to be there listening to me, like little prissy white girl talking to them about self-compassion.
Right.
But I could see their little wheels turning because nobody talked to them like I was talking to them about, you have a relationship with yourself, and you have the power to change the internal state of yourself. And kids are pretty disempowered. A child is disempowered kind of by definition, and then as you get to a teen, you're trying to establish your own power and pulling away from your parents, and it's obviously a very tumultuous time. I think these types of skills would be fantastic. And I think that if a teen market would be ideal. I think it dovetails with some of the stuff that that bullying is addressing, bullying programs in the schools, because really what that's addressing is the same thing that we talked about with stigma with adults, is that, you're not allowed to, you're not allowed to punch the fat kid. That's no. Can't do that, you can't even label them that. That's an individual who has feelings just like you have feelings, And so I think that, imagine bringing up a whole generation of youth that had different vocabulary around that.
Different vocabulary and different tools at their disposal. And like Kevin said in his comment here, that it's increasing awareness and also it's intervention. It's early intervention so that we can nip some of this stuff in the bud, so that the kids actually have these these apps at their disposal where they can actually develop these strengths and then share them with their friends too. You know, their
Yeah.
friend can say, hey, I noticed, wow, you dealt with that situation so well. You know, how'd you do that? You know, and the kid can say, well, there's this cool app I'm using and helped
Yeah.
me take a deep breath before I reacted, you know.
Well, and peer support is amazing. I mean, we see that
Oh,
in
yeah.
the addiction world. The addiction recovery world is built, so much of it's built around peer support. I mean, it really works. And,
Absolutely.
you know, our young people are clearly slipping through the cracks. You know, when things are broken at home and there's not people paying close enough attention at school, you know, these kids don't get any attention until they literally crack.
Hmm.
And we can definitely do a better job of that. And I would love to see mobile tools be a part of that.
Oh, it's wonderful because kids, you know, they're almost born with smartphones in their hands now, so we might as well give
Right.
them some apps they can use. Actually, I don't have a smartphone yet. I just have a little dumb phone here, and Kevin's been after me for a long time, and I think 2014, around my 50th birthday, might be the time for me to make the leap to a smartphone. So
That's great. You know,
the days are coming.
I
The
used to
time's
have
coming.
a BlackBerry phone, which
Yeah.
was similar in nature to what you're holding, and
Hmm.
I really was kind of in love with my BlackBerry phone, and I was a little reluctant to get the iPhone, but I was teaching a course called Emerging Technologies for Teaching and Learning, and so
Oh,
I thought, well, you know, I can't rightly teach this course if I don't have like the latest technology, and when I got the iPhone, it fundamentally changed my life.
I'm sure. Right.
And I was like, wow, okay, whatever this whole like smartphone thing is, like I need to figure out how to design for this
Right.
technology.
Right. Yeah. Kevin says, I saw that BlackBerry in a YouTube video of her office. So he actually saw the BlackBerry on your YouTube
That
video.
was, oh my gosh, that was my first. I think I maybe my first flip cam,
Sure. Sure.
2009 or something. Yeah,
Right.
I think I labeled it like, you know, another stupid video of somebody's office.
Right. Well, you know, back in the day, I think it was probably about 7 years ago, I was working for a very cutting edge case management program based out of a community health center in Springfield, Massachusetts. And my boss, who's still my friend at that time, my boss at that time, who's still my friend now, he got us all trios. So we had trios. So we were using very, very early devices at that time for our patient care and various applications. So you know, it was pretty cutting edge at that time. It was pretty cool. And I actually had a blog at that time called A Nurse and His Trio, and I posted a photograph taken with my trio every day for 365 days.
Oh
And
my gosh, that's
Kevin
fantastic.
saying, yeah, that was a PDA. Yeah, I had a PDA back at that time, and it was
Yeah.
pretty cool and cutting edge. But you know, Kevin actually made another comment, and we have a few minutes left, and he wanted to know, you know, we talked about um, the fact that you won't have a big brother type of oversight, say, of a nurse manager monitoring what his or her nurses are doing in terms of their self-compassion. It'll just show aggregate data saying this, you know, so many breaks have been taken, so many diaphragmatic breathing apps have been engaged with this week by your nurses, for instance. Kevin was curious, just briefly, if you'd like to talk about how could a healthcare provider actually use an app like this with a patient or client who's struggling with self-esteem issues or depression or even full-blown what we call mental illness. So could it be used in that way but still not be um, not be not bring up privacy issues for the patient?
I think that the best way to answer this question is in the context of the app that we're developing for recovery. And so we're working on a tool that we're calling Resilient Recovery, and it is for people who have already been through the early stages of recovery, and so they're in the maintenance stage and really the final stage of creating a new life for themselves.
Hmm.
Um, and in that application, one of the things we've created a structure like the social structure like you would have in a face-to-face. So you know there's places to put in your sponsor, so your sponsor could access your dashboard. So in that case, you're opting your sponsor in to see how you're checking in every day. in that case, it's really appropriate, right, for them to be tracking you. Also, maybe if your case manager, if you're having to work through the court system, we could have a dashboard for the case manager. And so in that case, we have different levels. We can create a dashboard, because what the phone is doing is sending the data encrypted to our database. And so we can take the data from that database and put it out in a dashboard where it's accessible through the web, all encrypted with logins to people who need to see it. And who the user gives option to see it. And so you might want to opt in your spouse, especially if it's, the third time you've been through rehab and you don't want to lose that marriage,
Right.
There may be perfectly legitimate and appropriate reasons for people to have full access to all of your data.
Exactly. And Kevin and I were just chatting real quickly. He was saying that, this would be a scenario where a patient voluntarily relinquishes access to their data. It's kind of like when a patient comes in, hands you their glucometer, you plug it into your computer via USB and download their blood sugars onto your computer so that you can see the arc of their blood sugars since the last visit. So it's kind of the same. It's the same thing, though the patient sharing their blood sugar readings with you as a clinician is not quite as personal as sharing, this kind of psycho-emotional inner work that's happening. So it's a slightly different, but it's the same notion. And I think it's really cool. And patients or clients who really want to engage with their providers in that way and vice versa, there could be a lot of gains in that type of level of interaction in terms of the data that comes from these sorts of apps.
Yeah, and if you look in the mental health world on the healthcare side, we could have a type of opt-in for your therapist. But one of the intervention layers that we see as really useful that goes across both apps actually is kind of the coach level. Where you're working with a life coach or a mastermind coach or an addiction coach, where it's somebody that you do want to fully disclose what you're doing with because they're on your team and they want to see you be successful. And so, anybody who's on the healthcare team, I could see us setting it up so that you could opt in people and give them a level of security.
Access,
And I think it all depends on how our corporate clients come to us. If they what do they look like? Is that corporate client Twitter? So do I have a few thousand employees who are very tech forward thinking and maybe also understand mindfulness and want to have certain types of interactions, or on the addiction side that might look very different about how we pull the data out of the database and display it back to parties.
Exactly, right. That's wonderful. It's beautiful. So, that's really it's a perfect. It could be a perfect application with, say, child psychologists who are working with teens or preteens in order to teach them tools and monitor how they're doing. I could see it being used in healthcare facilities with patients, but also with our employees, wanting to keep our employees healthy and on track, and could also be used in many ways. Like you said, in recovery, it really makes a lot of sense in terms of working with a sponsor or an addiction specialist who's really trying to help the patient really move forward and really wants to monitor exactly what's going on and how they're doing. And so it's a perfect melding of technology with treatment and just that general awareness. So I wanted to mention to all of our listeners that InnerAlly is at InnerAlly.com. That's the word inner and ally, ALLY.com. I notice you're on Twitter. I just followed you at InnerAlly, and also Facebook.com/InnerAlly. So you can find them on Facebook. Please like them. And I also noticed that you have an InnerAlly group on Facebook. So do you want to mention before we finish just a little bit about the group and It's
Yeah.
actually facebook.com/groups/InnerAllies, ALLIES. So what's the purpose of the group?
That's where the action is. So, the other media fields are what I see as more of a push, and they're a little harder to have a conversation. Whereas InnerAllies is a group, and so anybody can come into the group, and we're basically doing sharing there. So anyone that's interested in how to foster their inner compassion, they're interested in positive psychology and how to make their life better, how to be practicing these principles, is welcome to come. And that's where I intend to kind of create the community for InnerAlly. And so if you are interested in what we were talking here about today, please ask to join InnerAllies. I think you can just type InnerAllies into Facebook search, and it'll pull our group right up.
Perfect.
And please join, and I'll approve you, and we can start having more of these conversations, because what we really want to hear from people about, how have they practiced self-compassion, how have they practiced other positive psychology techniques with themselves, and what's been beneficial, and what they think they would like to see, technology facilitating for them.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And then I wish Kevin was on the call right now, because I know he was actually interested in being a beta tester for this app or one of your other apps. So you two will have to connect offline, online, but off the show, and talk about how he might have his company or however he would like to interface with you all. Because he's a real app guy. He's a real technology person, as most of our listeners and viewers know. And he's really into mobile apps, and I'm sure would love to interface with you and check this out and really. And he loves to video blog, so I'm sure he would love to video blog about his experience of using that.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so he'll be all over it. So I'm sure he'll be in touch with you soon. And Cynthia, I just want to make sure everyone knows to go to InnerAlly.com. And before we go, is there anything else you'd like to say, or anything you'd like our community to know about getting in touch, or any last words of wisdom?
Oh gosh, well, last words of wisdom.
Yes.
I only create apps that I need to use myself. I don't.
That's a good one. Okay.
But if you are interested in beta testing with us, you can, InnerAlly.com, the website has a form that you can put your email address in, and that's going to be the primary way that we send out information that, hey, this beta is ready. We're going to be using iOS first, and so if you've got an iPhone, you're going to be able to participate. And then we'll just keep you posted through both that mechanism, which is essentially a newsletter mechanism that comes through email, but then you can also find out what's going on at the InnerAllies Facebook group, and depending on what you prefer, how you prefer to get your information.
Great. Okay, so I'm sure Kevin will be over there shortly to sign up and say that he wants to beta test. I'm speaking for him, actually. And once I get my iPhone sometime in 2014, I'll sign up too. But I think it's going to be a little while yet. I'm not quite ready to make the leap, but I'm getting there.
I can coach you through it there, Keith.
Oh, good, Cynthia. So, Cynthia Phelps, it has been such a pleasure. I hope to get down to San Antonio with my wife sometime and pay you a visit and go out to dinner on the Riverwalk and play with our iPhones together.
That would be lovely.
Yeah, it'd be great. And thank you so much for being here. And this show is going to be archived. It'll be on iTunes. It'll be everywhere. It'll be on YouTube. So we'll make sure this show gets out there and people hear all about it. And there'll be an InnerAlly page on our website probably within the next week or so once the podcast is ready. So thank you so much for being here. It's really been wonderful to have you.
My pleasure, Keith. I'm so happy that you do this type of thing for your community.
Oh, great. Thanks, Cynthia. I'll be in touch with you, okay?
Bye.
All right, bye. So, folks, I'm really sorry that Kevin couldn't be here. It was great to have Cynthia Phelps here. She and I met through a series of events through a group called Wisdompreneurs that's growing around the country, and it is such a delight to have my first Wisdompreneur on the show, someone who's in that network. And you can talk to me offline if you want to hear more about the Wisdompreneur movement. Now, if you're interested to find out what's going on RNFM radio in the weeks to come, next week is, drumroll please, Nurses Week. And on the 5th, which is Monday, this coming Monday, the Cinco de Mayo, we will be launching a pre-recorded podcast all about the new film, The American Nurse, which is opening at some theaters near you around the country during Nurses Week. So we will be launching this pre-recorded podcast on the 5th. You'll be able to catch it at rnfmradio.com or just look at our Facebook page or on Twitter. We'll be blasting it out. And The American Nurse is an amazing film that features 5 different nurses doing different types of nursing, including hospital nursing, working in the military, and working in long-term care and home care. And it is really a moving and beautiful film. So we really look forward to you hearing the conversation with the producer, the director, and one of the nurses featured in the film. So it is an amazing show, and the film is especially amazing. It's actually being screened here in Santa Fe later in May by the New Mexico Nurses Association. So watch for The American Nurse, and you can just Google American Nurse Film or American Nurse Project and hear all about that. So next Monday the 5th, we'll be launching that pre-recorded podcast. It'll be there for you. On Wednesday, May 7th, I'll be in Phoenix speaking at the Infusion Nurses Society National Convention, but in the afternoon following my talk, I'll be live on a Google Hangout with Kevin. We'll be celebrating Nurses Week, talking about giveaways and fun things, and just celebrating our community and nurses all over the world. On the 28th of May, that's our next live Google Hangout after Nurses Week, we'll be live with Gail Ingram. She's a Manhattan-based concierge nurse, and she's kind of a concierge nurse to the rich and famous in New York City on the island of Manhattan. So she'll be talking about how she launched a concierge nursing service, how you could launch a concierge nursing service, and what it means to be a concierge nurse. What does it mean to hang a shingle in that way? And she's really doing it there in Manhattan. She wants you to know what it's like and how she's made that happen for herself. There'll be a lot of other pre-recorded podcasts being put up on our site and sent out on social media over the next couple weeks. We have several in the can that Kevin's working on diligently now to bring to you. So those pre-recorded shows will be coming. There's more live Google Hangouts scheduled for June, July, August, and September. We'll be letting you know about those as they come up. So, as always, we want to thank you for spending time with us here at RNFM Radio. Again, our apologies that Kevin wasn't able to be active on this show. He was here in the background, but not with us in person. So I missed him. I'm sure you all missed him too, and I'm sure Cynthia missed him because she wanted to really hang out with Kevin, but he was here in spirit and he was in the back end helping us out. So we hope that you've in some way felt uplifted, motivated, and ready for something that moves the needle for you. This definitely moved my needle, and I'm really ready to get an iPhone and start using these self-compassion apps. So innovate and create, find passion in your life and career each and every day, care for yourself while caring for others, and we look forward to having you back here with us again live on RNFM Radio.